Today, we're going to be talking about the biggest myths when it comes to having a healthy cycle. If you're new here, hi, my name is Denise. I'm a psychosexual health educator and a clinical herbalist with a focus on cycle health. I myself have been on a journey of figuring out how to balance my hormones naturally for about 6 to 7 years now. So I have come across these myths multiple times from many different sources, from the overall internet, friends, family, to professionals like doctors and dermatologists. And not only are these myths wrong, but they're also detrimental for mental health, especially for those that have been struggling with hormonal issues for many cycles, many months, many years, even. And they can be overall harmful because they are lacking in the understanding of how our hormones function. Let's go ahead and try to clear some of these up for you. The first one that I come across a lot is that you need to exercise more. Now, I personally got told this from my doctor when I was on the Depo-Provera shot. I had gained a lot of weight within the span of, I want to say, like 3 months. I want to say about 10 pounds in just water weight. And then when I went to my other checkup, and because it's every 3 months that they give you the shot, and I was like, hey, I'm gaining a lot of weight. What's going on? My doctor basically just told me that you just need to exercise more, or maybe you're just eating more. Or what I've seen more often right now is that they claim that these types of hormonal birth control, specifically the Depo-Provera shot, makes it so that it increases your appetite. Therefore, you're just eating more. But having experienced this before, I know for a fact that my eating habits did not change. And there's no way that I would have gained 10 pounds within the span of, I want to say, like 3 months. But not knowing what else to do at the time, I followed that advice. I was working out, going to the gym 3 times a week, and doing cardio at home twice a week. So I was working out a total of 5 days a week, while also trying to decrease the amount of calories I was eating because I had fallen into the myth that calorie in, calorie out, that's all that mattered. And nothing changed. No amount of working out, no amount of restrictive dieting was helping me lose any of the excess weight. It wasn't until I stopped the it wasn't until I stopped getting the Depo shot that I was able to then lose the weight. So now let's talk about why exactly this is a myth. So, no amount of exercise is going to help a hormonal component because this is one of the side effects. After the fact that I was on the Depo-Provera shot, I learned that it is actually one of the side effects and one of the common side effects of this birth control. So, no amount of exercising was going to counterbalance or counter effect this main side effect. Now, let's say that you are not on hormonal birth control. I would still say the same thing because when you are having a hormonal imbalance, that means that your body is possibly in a state of fight or flight, that it doesn't feel safe. And if it doesn't feel safe, so for instance, there is chronic stress, there is restrictive dieting, there is insomnia, things that tell your body that it is not safe enough to ovulate, because when we need to ovulate to produce hormones. So what happens is that your body thinks that there is war, that there is famine, that there's something going on, that it's not safe, one, to ovulate, and two, that we need to conserve our resources. So it will store extra fat in the body. And then what happens is that this extra fat that the body's holding in is then also producing estrogen. So then it becomes a little bit of a vicious cycle. No amount of excess exercise will be helping your body feel any safer, especially if you're dealing with chronic stress. So a better approach to this, because exercise is still important, we still be wanting to move our body instead of pushing our body to be exercising more and more and more, because then that produces more cortisol, more adrenaline. It feeds into the stress component of it. Instead of doing that, think of lighter exercises you can do, more body weight exercises. So things like Pilates or calisthenics, or doing just more minimal exercises that are focusing on building muscle and working on mobility would be a lot better of a strategy than just trying to work your body into something where it doesn't feel safe to do so, which in turn will then further the hormonal imbalance. All right, so myth number two. Now, this one I kind of alluded to before in the first myth, and that myth is that you need to eat less. So if you're struggling with a hormonal imbalance and you're noticing that you're gaining weight or it's becoming really hard to shed that weight, that all you have to do is eat less, when that is, once again, not a good idea. So first I'll go into my experience. So once I was trying to figure out how I can get rid of this weight. And I was also dealing with severe cystic acne at the time. So I then switched to a vegetarian diet for both animal welfare as well as finding a way to minimize anything that could be causing the cystic acne. So I was thinking dairy, cheeses, gluten, anything that could be positively triggering the acne. So I went vegetarian and then later on went vegan. And I had gotten into the habit of tracking my calories. And it actually was very hard to hit the daily requirement from set by the FDA. I found it very hard to hit that limit on a vegan diet. So a lot of the times I was under eating, not because I wanted to specifically, but because it was just very hard to be eating all of these veggies and all of these tofus enough to be hitting that. And at the time, I didn't really have an understanding of nutrition, so there was no focus on protein or healthy fats. All my lunches really consisted of was things like sweet potatoes and spinach and roasted veggies and maybe something like tofu here and there. And that continued for, I want to say, a couple of years. And my cycles were very irregular. I still had a lot of cystic acne, which was my main concern, was the amount of cystic acne that I was experiencing. And now that I've learned more about nutrition and hormonal health, I can say that eating less would be counterintuitive to balancing your hormones. And that's because we're missing a main component. Because all we're thinking about is, oh, I need to eat less, but not what should I be eating instead? Because if we're eating less and we're only having, like me, only having sweet potatoes and veggies and not a whole lot of protein, then there is no building blocks to building those hormones because our hormones are made out of cholesterol. So we need to be having healthy fats and protein to be able to make those hormones. And once again, we come back to making sure that our body feels safe enough to be ovulating. Because if our body's like, oh, hey, we're not getting a whole lot of calories, there is a famine, there's war, there is an issue, conflict, we need to make sure that we're storing in all of those reserves, all of those fats need to be stored. Because something is going on, there's not a good amount of food available apparently, which then causes a stressor on the body, which then releases more cortisol. So it's an internal stress as well, which then furthers the cycle of a hormonal imbalance. So instead, what I teach my clients and everyone is don't focus on the amount of calories. That doesn't mean anything. Instead, focusing on the ingredients, so making sure they're ideally clean ingredients. So clean, good quality whenever possible, because they are a little bit on the more expensive side. And that your meals are balanced. So making sure that there is protein, healthy fat, carbohydrate, and a veggie. And probably one I think is the most important aspect of nutrition is making sure that your blood sugar levels are stable because when they're not stable, then that could then lead to, once again, internal stressors and your body making more cortisol. So what that looks like is once again having that protein and healthy fats with every meal. So avoiding anything that is super sweet, especially in the morning. So things like smoothies, pair that with a healthy fat and protein so that you avoid those blood sugar spikes. Okay, next myth, which also is still in the realm of nutrition, is intermittent fasting. Now, intermittent fasting is still pretty big hype right now. And my biggest issue with it is that the majority of the studies that show the benefits of intermittent fasting was done on a male body with male hormones. Now, male hormones cycle every 24 hours. So every 24 hours, they get the same range, they reset. While us with longer cycles, it takes 26 to 38 days. So that is a lot different than someone with a male body. And once again, we're going back to making sure that our body feels safe because if we're getting up and not eating and, for instance, doing a lot of exercises and then having something sweet like an acai bowl or a smoothie, that will then cause a really big spike in our blood sugar levels and then another big spike in insulin levels. And it comes into a roller coaster first thing in the morning. Having your body release so much insulin day in and day out turns into an internal stressor, which once again will be causing more cortisol to be produced in the body. I personally don't recommend intermittent fasting. Instead, I would prefer to eat about an hour after waking up and having a big, rich breakfast. So ideally, I like to have a bigger breakfast, bigger lunch, and a smaller dinner because I think of it as energy. So we need the most amount of energy during morning, during lunch, and a little bit during dinner. So you can play around with that yourself. See how it feels to have a bigger breakfast, bigger lunch, and a smaller dinner. And if it feels good, continue. If it doesn't, then play around with that. It's all about an experiment and finding what is best for you in your body. So I honestly try to stay away from things that are, oh, it's good for everyone. Everyone should be doing this type of diet or this type of new exercise routine. Instead, I say experiment, see how your body feels, and go from there. And then finally, what I think is probably the most detrimental myth and the biggest myth of all is that you don't need a cycle or a period unless you want to have kids. Now, I think this is one of my biggest barriers when it came to getting tests for hormones and trying to figure out my own health issues with working with a doctor. Whenever I'd go in, I'd be like, hey, I wanted to get my hormones tested. There's something going on. There's a hormonal imbalance. Then they would immediately be like, oh, you want to get pregnant. And then I'd be like, no, I'm just trying to figure out what's going on with my hormones. They're like, oh, so you don't want kids? And I would say no. And they're like, oh, so birth control. And it was such a weird dynamic that I decided to go my own route and figure out how to do it myself. And it's such a shame that there is such a lack of understanding about how our hormones are integral to our overall health and body. Every cell in our body has hormone receptors. For estrogen and progesterone, there is this dance of these two hormones that are key for things like our cardiovascular health, our breast health, our bone health, our mental health, and things that we have not yet researched because there is also a lack of research on just female anatomy and biology. And even though we are in a better place than we were before when it comes to knowledge about our bodies, there's still this underlying misunderstanding that our body is like a male body, but smaller, when that is not the case. Because before, the main consensus was outside of the bikini area, our bodies were the same. And new research has shown that our bodies are very different because our hormones function very different. Male bodies have 24-hour hormones that reset, while our bodies have longer stretches of time with different hormones at play that can become imbalanced. And this imbalance will then cascade to other parts of the body. And that's why I educate around this piece a lot, is that you need to understand that ovulation is so much more than just for reproduction. It is for our overall health. And to have balanced, healthy hormones, we need to be ovulating. So we do need to kind of shift the mind frame. At least I know I had to shift my mindset because as someone that doesn't want kids, I had the sense of ovulation is bad. I don't want to know anything about it. It's linked to having babies, but it's not. It is about our overall health, and that is how we mainly produce progesterone. So those are a couple of the biggest myths that I have come across in my journey of trying to figure out how to balance my hormones naturally. If you have any other myths that you've come across, feel free to share them down below. I would love to see what other myths are out there that I did not cover. And I might be able to even do a part two because there is more and more myths that I didn't even get to. These are just the biggest ones that I have come across time and time again. All right, and that's all for me today. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I'll be seeing you next time.